Hello everybody and welcome to the Little Fella Sports Podcast. And as you can see, as part of the IPL reviews, we've got Punjab Kings this time, obviously formerly known as the Kings 11 Punjab. And to discuss about that, we've once again got Karthikeya. Thanks a lot for joining us, Karthikeya. So first things first, Karthikeya. Kings 11 Punjab, or rather the Punjab Kings, last season was one, you could say, it was a proper roller coaster, right? From start to finish, every single game pretty much. What do you make of last season as a whole for Punjab Kings, and what were your thoughts heading into the season for Punjab, and what were your final inferences as such?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what to make of last season because I didn't have too many expectations from them coming in with that bowling lineup that they had put together in the auction. I didn't expect much. And they actually ended up overperforming the start of the season and they didn't close out games. So that really ended up hurting them. And when they built momentum towards the end, they fell at the last hurdle when they really should have gotten over the line. So it was an overall very disappointing season for them. But what they've done in this year's auction is very promising because they filled in the gaps from last year, which obviously means you'd expect them to perform better.
Definitely. I think last season, you mentioned the start of the season, I think their performance was definitely over expectation in terms of how close they got with games against Delhi, the games against third game which they lost, Rajasthan Royals, where
Rajasthan.
Devante hit 20, 28 or 30 of short runs over. All those games, I think they were really good. And then they obviously hit a run between games. I think 4 to 8, I think they were just gone, lost all the confidence. And I think it was 1-6 and they won 5 in a row. And just when you thought they could potentially take a playoff spot, again they collapsed towards the end. But it was one of those seasons where things went okay, but looking back at it, I'd say that Punjab slightly overperformed, but at the same time, you feel that they could have done slightly better considering the positions they got into.
Yes, definitely.
So looking at the team and the performance they had in the auction, as you mentioned, they made some very interesting buys. Of course, they had the most plus 53 crores heading into the auction. They had all the money to play with, and surprisingly, they did not go and pick Chris Morris, which was a slight surprise. I expected Rajasthan and them to fight for it, but they obviously decided to let go of Chris Morris. And in terms of their other buys, obviously they got Jai Richardson for big money, they got Riley Meredith for big money, they got Shah Rukh Khan for big money as well, and then they got David Malan. These were probably their major signings. So, what do you make of their auction performances in terms of them trying to fill in the slots they needed to?
Yes, definitely disappointing they didn't get Morris because they were left with some money at the end of the auction. So you would have thought they would have gone further, which would have further for Morris, which would have actually solidified their team. But let's look at it from a perspective from what other teams have taken. I don't think any other team would be brave enough to go out there and dispose of their overseas options, which they consider as baggage. I look at Rajasthan Royals. They retained David Muller and Andrew Tye, who didn't get a game last year. RCB retained Kane Richardson from last year.
And
CSK retained their entire team, entire overseas pool. And Punjab actually looked at every overseas option, evaluated them based on what they thought the upside was, and went ahead and retained the right options. Chris Gale, Nicholas Pooran, Chris Jordan. Jordan obviously did not perform to expectation last year, but he's an above average option at the depth. So they went ahead and retained the right three players, and they filled in whatever gaps they had to with their other five buys, as you said. So overall, I think they did very well in the auction, which we're not accustomed to seeing from them. But I think this is definitely a season where they have a very good platform, they have a very good squad coming in, and all they have to do is get their roles together and perform.
Exactly. I think one mention you told in terms of if they'd gotten Chris Morris. I personally agree with you completely. I think if they'd gotten Chris Morris and Jai Richardson, considering the money they had towards the end, I think that would have definitely solved all their issues in terms of both getting a hitter towards the end at number 7, number 8, and as well as getting a proper death bowler. Because of course you've got Jai, Riley Meredith, and Jordan, but you have to admit that they aren't a gun or a nailed-on death bowler. Someone like Chris Morris, which someone like Chris Morris would have been, right?
Right, definitely. Morris is a proven option today. He's one of the best death bowlers in the last few years. And I think apart from that, I don't think Jai Richardson is a number 7. We'll get to the squad later and the dilemma that they'll face. But Jai Richardson is a very good number 8. He's not a number 7. Morris would have been the perfect fit at 7. And you complement that with Richardson at 8, that would have been the ultimate setup. Rajasthan now have that with Archer at 8 and Morris at 7. Right. So I think that's where Punjab definitely missed out because, as you'll see, once when we look at this squad, they're going to face a dilemma between going with additional batting depth or picking their best bowling attack. In terms of death bowling options, yeah, like we said, Morris is the ultimate death bowling option from the pool they had, but Richardson showed good signs in the Big Bash, and I think Crowley Meredith also showed good signs by attempting only Yorkers at the death. That's something that's gone out of fashion in the last few years with teams attempting slower balls, attempting hard lengths. But Meredith is someone who can actually go ahead, attempt those Yorkers, and bowl in that surprise quick bouncer. So he's an option, and if it doesn't work out with him, they could always swap to Jordan, who's, I would say, a safe option at the death. I don't think he's a gun bowler in different phases of the innings. But if they have to go back to Jordan, he did a decent job last year towards the end of the season after he recovered from that sternest thrashing. So I don't think I think the bigger issue with not picking up Morris is their compromise on batting depth.
Yeah, that we'll talk about when we get to the squads now. So
Right.
getting over to the squads, of course, as you mentioned, in terms of they obviously had a lot of money to play with. They had a lot of options to fill, and obviously they went and filled. So looking at the top order, we have to start with KL Rahul, of course. What do you make of KL Rahul's performance last season? First question.
He obviously underperformed. We know his potential against pace bowling at the top, and yet he went ahead and, I don't know, wasted the entire power play for no apparent reason. And against spin, some people are going to say he showed lack of intent, but I think the sample size is increasing, and I think his spin hitting gears have definitely slowed down,
Especially leg spin.
especially leg spin, right? And I think he got out to part time spinners at some point in the season as well. So I think that's definitely an ability issue on top of intent. So when you realize that your spin hitting gears are down, you'd expect him to come out in the power play all guns blazing, a bit like Josh Butler. I know they're not at the same level, but Butler is someone who deliberately goes out and smashes the power play so that he can afford himself that bit of a slowdown in the middle overs and then go out there and smash it at the death again. So I think that's definitely something Rahul has to work on this year. Show more intent in the power play consciously and try maximizing that
Wow.
amazing range that he has against fast bowling. I don't think he's
And
going to go out there and waste that again.
exactly. And one thing you actually mentioned in terms of him and Butler not being the same. The sad part is he was actually outperforming Butler on all metrics for 2 years in a row, especially the 2018 season. Even when Butler had his best IPL season to date, even at that point,
Exactly.
KL was outperforming him in all metrics. And it's kind of sad to see what's happened. I mean, of course, he's got 700 plus runs, whatever it may be, but it still feels that he could do a lot more than what he did, and his potential at least shows that he could go to a couple. I mean, he could go a couple more gears up. Apart from that,
Definitely.
of course, Mayank Agarwal and Nicholas Pooran, the two bright, shining stars of Punjab last season. Of course, Mayank had a season he's never had before in terms of consistency. I think intent's never been an issue with him. He's one of those guys who tries to go out and play. No matter what, his intent was obviously spot on, but consistency obviously came along last season. And of course, Nicholas Pooran had his, you could say, his breakout IPL season. So, talking about Nicholas Pooran, of course, as a West Indies fan, how excited were you to watch him finally crack the IPL, and what do you think would be his challenges heading into this season? Because he's going to be one of those guys who will be definitely looked at this time, right? Specifically.
Right, exactly. I think Pooran should have had his breakout in 2019,
19.
and they ended up playing David Miller ahead of him for most of the season. So that was definitely very disappointing. He came in towards the end of that season, and I think he smashed Washington Sundar in one of the games against RCB.
RCB,
And that at Chinnaswamy, right? And being a left-hander, you see that range against an off spinner. That's definitely something very exciting. And Kings 11 saw that. He Pooran himself backed up his performance in towards the end of that IPL with international performances, with CPL performances, and obviously he didn't start off too well at the start of last season, but they went ahead and they backed him.
Exactly. To his
And
first couple of games, especially the way he got out to off spin.
exactly, and I think that's what most IPL teams don't do. We saw what happened with Shimron Hetmeyer, who definitely has the talent of Pooran, maybe even more than that. And both the IPL teams that he's been picked up by so far haven't maximized his talent. So Punjab, what Punjab definitely did a great thing by backing Pooran, giving him his best role, putting him above Maxwell when they needed to. They sent him in that spin hitting role and he excelled at it. But I think Pooran, I don't think he's done enough work in the off season against pace bowling. As we saw in that T10 league, if someone watched clips, he really struggled against Fidel Edwards in one of those overs. And you can't look at that and ignore it, right? And IPL teams are definitely going to look at that coming into this season. And I don't think he has that power hitting base or range against proper express pace, especially hard length. And teams are going to see that. The way he got away facing Abdul Samad, Abhishek Sharma, Marcus Stoinis last season, that's not going to happen again. So I think he's going to have a bit of a. If last year was his breakout, this year's probably going to be a transition season for him.
A challenge.
Because, right, a challenging one. I'm not saying he can't crack it, but I think if he's going to get to the level of an IPL legend, it's something he's going to have to face at some point, and he's going to face it this year. And I think that's where teams are going to. I think that's where the Punjab are probably going to benefit by having Chris Gale again this year, right at the outset, because he's someone who should be able to share that spin hitting load with Pooran. If Pooran struggles to start the season as he ended up last time, Gale is a safe option against spin bowling. So I think that duo will definitely help them ease out things for Pooran if he's targeted as he's expected to be this year.
And one thing which probably will help him is if he continues his intent against Phil bowlers. That was incredible to see last season.
Definitely.
I mean, like, the way he took down every bowler who was, you could say, aren't really frontline bowler. I think if he continues that, I think he should be okay. Of course, he will face tougher challenges in terms of bowlers not bowling immediately, part-time bowlers not bowling immediately to him at the start of the innings at least. But if he gets through that phase, I think he should be absolutely fine. So it's definitely going to be one of those interesting seasons for Pooran.
Of course, once you come in that post power play over, so especially if Pooran enters in the seventh over, teams are going to be inclined, however tempting it's not to do it, they're going to try sneak in some fifth bowling option, sixth bowling option.
And the Pooran needs have a team.
Yeah, you're going to have a team that does that. And Pooran needs just one over. Like we saw last year, he finished games in the span of 2 or 3 overs. And for me, what I want to see from Pooran is definitely the same intent. I want him to show the same intent against that junk bowling option, but also tone down that aggression against, say, a Rabada or a Bumrah. Last year, what I saw was
he tried to
take them down because, yeah, and I appreciate that intent, of course, but again, like I said, if he's going to go to the level of a Chris Gale or an Andre Russell or someone in IPL, in terms of IPL performance, I think he can do well by toning down that aggression when he needs to. Just show a bit more game sense and take the game deep, pick his bowlers a little better. So, yeah, it's definitely very exciting to see how he goes about his development this year.
Exactly. I think Gale and Pollard are two guys you can actually look at in terms of trying to target specific bowlers and take them down.
Right.
And of course, in terms of top four, obviously, I think you expect KL Mind to open. Gale, I don't think David Malan is going to start, and his numbers in the India series, if anything, shows that he has no right to start ahead of Chris Gale. So Gale is at 3, Pooran at 4. There's a slot for 2 Indian batsmen or a Fabian Allen. So what do you make that? There's likes of Fabian Allen, Shah Rukh Khan obviously got bought for a lot of money, and you've got the likes of Mandeep Singh, Sarfaraz Khan, Simran Singh, all these guys. Who do you think will take that 5 and 6, or maybe even 7, as we mentioned, in terms of their depth issue?
Right. So personally, I'd start with Sarfaraz. I don't think many batsmen in India have that range against fast bowling that he has at the depth. I don't think teams have uncovered his potential so far. So I'd definitely consider starting with Sarfaraz. But Hooda did well at the end of last season. I don't know what value he adds without being used as a floater, because once you have Gale and Pooran, I don't think you'd want another proper spin hitter in the 11, which I think Hooda is. So personally, I think I'd pick Shah Rukh Khan and Sarfaraz with Hooda sitting out. But they obviously have that option of bringing someone else in. So it's not something I'd be too concerned about. It's not the cream of options that, I don't know, Mumbai Indians might have or Delhi Capitals might have in terms of middle order power hitting. But it's something they can definitely work with. Fabian Allen, see, I don't think Sunrisers did the right thing by benching him to the entire season last year and then actually releasing him when they could actually see that Mohammad Nabi's performances are declining. But if Fabian gets a game this year, which I think he should at Chepauk, considering they'll miss a spin bowling all rounder option. They have two very promising wrist spinners, obviously, but they'll miss a spin bowling option if they don't pick Allen at Chepauk. So for Allen, it's simple. He gets 2 games at Chepauk. He shows them what he can do, and he slots in for the rest of the season, right? And again, as I said earlier, if teams are going to use up their proper pace bowling options against Pooran and Gale earlier on, you want someone to actually cash in at the end. Maxwell didn't do that last year. So by having someone like Allen, if your options are depleted by the time you get to the death, Allen is someone who, again, like Pooran, he smashes any type of junk bowling. So that's something that can maximize it at the end. What's going to hold back Punjab Kings from using Allen is going to be the temptation to play 2 overseas fast bowlers, right? And that'll
Got
obviously
three
help their
options for that as well.
3 options for that, and it's going to help with their balance in terms of bowling because last year's bowling attack was not promising to say the least. I think they overperformed by, I think Shami overperformed to some extent, the 2 spinners overperformed to some extent, and I don't expect them to get away with that. So I think they should start the season with 2 overseas fast bowlers, slot in Allen and Chepauk and see what happens, and then go ahead from there.
Obviously, I mean 5 and 6. I think Allen's going to find it slightly difficult to get a game at the start, but as you mentioned, once they get to a phase where they play, for example, at the Chepauk, and you would have seen a number of games happen at Chepauk by then. I think Punjab play somewhere in the middle only. So obviously, in terms of pace, I mean, in terms of options at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, I think Shami takes up a place. The 2 leg spinners take up a place. I think Jai takes up a place. So there's that one spot at number 7. So it's either Chris Jordan or Riley Meredith. Who do you pick, assuming that they don't go with Allen at the start?
So Riley Meredith is locked in for you, right? Maybe.
No, Jai is locked in.
Jai is locked in, right? Yeah. It's either Riley or Jordan, right? So I'd go with Riley because I think teams are slowly transitioning towards that middle overs enforcer. And Rick Nokia, we saw what he did last year along with Rabada. They absolutely bullied any batsman who was slightly weak against hard lengths in those middle overs. And we see Mumbai Indians are probably going to go out with that same approach with Adam Milne this year. So I'd start with Meredith. And Meredith is someone who I don't think will sustain his performance throughout the 14 games because...
Especially in the death.
Potentially, but I think it's more of a fitness issue because as we saw in the Big Bash as well, he started tapering off as the season went ahead. So it's obviously nice that they have that backup option with Jordan. But somehow I'm not convinced with Jordan's versatility outside the death overs. And if you have Jai and he's doing a reasonably good job at the death and Shami is nailing his Yorkers like last year, then I'd simply go ahead and start in Allen because people are going to say that second overseas option is going to add extra balance. But as we saw with last year, they went ahead, they put in their best batting lineup, they batted teams out of the game. It's not a bad approach. It's not the ideal approach, but I think
it's the nothing to lose approach in terms of trying to go and bat and score as much as you can.
Definitely, and if they see the need to make that change towards the end of the season, if they see that Meredith is not performing, or Jai is not performing, that probably means they're not doing too well in the season. And when you want to kickstart in your season, I'd probably go in and try batting teams out, like they did with Gale last year. He came in and their batting was suddenly upgraded. So I think if they need some sort of kick to their season, Allen is a better option than Jordan for that.
Exactly. I agree with you. Of course, there's also Arshdeep. So if they go into the season with Allen at some point, I don't know when, then you could probably see Allen fitting in at 6 or 7, and you've got Shami, Jai Richards in 8, 9, you've got Arshdeep, and then you've got 2 leg spinners. So they've got options in terms of bowling, but certainly one of those teams which you have to say that they've definitely strengthened massively from last season in terms of variety of options. We've discussed a lot of possibilities, whether
100%.
it's the middle order batting as well as the lower orders in terms of bowlers and the different options they could take. So they definitely upgraded from last season, and that's something they'll be hoping that will help them obviously progress into the playoffs. So in terms of X factor player, who would you say one guy who would potentially take them to the playoffs after a very long time? I think since 2014 they haven't made the playoffs. So
Hmm. So, if I were to pick one guy apart from those who we've discussed, that would probably be Ravi Bishnoi. I think what differentiated Bishnoi from every other wrist spinner in the IPL pool was his ability against left-handers. Taking that googly away from left-handers, I think I think other left-handers try to struggle dragging the ball towards the leg side that they usually do. So if they play Murugan Ashwin and Bishnoi provides that versatility against left-arm spinners and Murugan Ashwin against right-handers. And that's not something teams picking two wrist spinners can afford. Ideally, you'd think those two are one-dimensional
slightly
options, but it's
one-dimensional.
actually not, right? So if Bishnoi can sustain his performance from last season, then that sorts out their slightly weaker bowling attack. And I think if they decide to leave out Gale at some point of the season, I don't think it'll happen, but Gale is 41 and you can't expect 14 games of sustainable performances. So if they decide to drop Gale, they could start in Simran Singh at the top of the order and Allen at the bottom. And I think having Allen, Jai, and Meredith, that's a very nice lower order core.
That's
And
the ideal scenario.
exactly, that's the ideal scenario. And let's say Pooran starts the season well and they see that they don't need that extra cushion with Gale as a second left-hander, Prab Simran could have a really good season at the top because I think in the recent domestic season he performed really well, maximizing the power play. So, given KL Rahul's lack of intent, that's something that they could bridge there as well. So, a few options that they definitely have.
Definitely. And finally, heading towards the predictions. Obviously, they finished sixth last season. It was an iffy season, as we mentioned, a proper roller coaster. Do you think they've done enough to get into the playoffs and beyond the season? So, what are your predictions?
For me, Mumbai and Rajasthan are definitely making the playoffs, and I predicted that Sunrisers were going to make it. So that leaves me with one option. It's hard to look past Delhi Capitals because I think their core is very well set up. So for Punjab, hate to say it, but it might be another heartbreak season where they get really close and stumble at the last hurdle. It's definitely a much better team than last year. They've plugged in a lot of holes, but I think at the end of it, that small trade-offs that they made with Morris might come back hurting them because that's what separates them from being a clear playoff contender. So they're definitely contenders for that fourth or fifth position, but going by recent history, I would think maybe they
I
miss
think
out once
standard of
again.
the IPL is definitely in place. You can't get away even with a small issue here. You can't really fit in place. You saw it between say 2009 to 14. You saw guys playing in domestic players fitting in here and there, but right now it's very
Right.
ruthless. Teams are very very smart, and I agree. I think if they'd gotten Morris, they'd be where Rajasthan are in terms of Rajasthan being a proper contender for even the
Exactly.
title potentially. So
Right. I'm not saying all other six teams apart from Rajasthan and Mumbai have all bases covered. So they're
they can still
definitely
fit in.
among us.
It's going to be a
Yeah.
dogfight basically.
Yeah, it's going to be a dogfight, and like I said earlier, it's hard for us to predict who's going to finish at third and fourth
Small
because
margin,
it's going to be one
one
game
game.
or
Yeah.
net run rate. So yeah, I think at the end of it, it comes down to how they structure the team and who starts speaking at the right time. So it's
Completely.
going to be a tough one for sure.
Completely. And your predictions as such were obviously Mumbai Indians, Rajasthan Royals, Sunrisers Hyderabad, and potentially Delhi Capitals sneaking the fourth spot. So anyway, thanks a lot, Karthikeya. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Guys, please do like, share, subscribe to the channel. This is part of the 8-part series of our IPL previews. So Punjab Kings previews. So once again, thanks a lot for watching, and thanks a lot, Karthikeya, for joining in. It's been an absolute
Yeah,
pleasure having you on.
pleasure to be on. Thanks.